Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing On Zionist Literature by Ghassan Kanafani. If the name sounds familiar, I have reviewed Kanafani's short stories and a novelette on my Stephen Heiner main channel. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card for that. Kanafani is known, obviously, as this great writer of fiction among Palestinians, but he's also a great critic and a man of action. And this particular text, which was translated in 2022, gives us insight into Zionism through literature. And Kanafani had to read a lot of Zionist literature in order to put together some common themes that he sees in this. And we'll start with the use of Hebrew for non-religious purposes. As the movement struggled to transform Judaism into a national bond, it was necessary for it to appeal to Hebrew, because it represented the only possibility through which such a bond may be forged. Jews lived in lots of different countries, they spoke lots of different languages, and Hebrew was not a language that many of them spoke. It was ineluctable for Zionism, as a fabricated political movement, to weaponize language with such vehemence, an effort only matched by its hostility to social integration, against which it presented itself as an alternative. Weaponizing language in this way sharpened the contradiction within the Zionist cause, which wants to amalgamate nationalism with religion into a single concept. The connection between Jews and Hebrew has always been non-national in nature. The task of the Hebrew language was to assist in the articulation of religious ideas and interpretation since the dawn of Jewish history. Though the practice of writing in other languages was a natural custom, this of course does not mean the Jews were not proud of the language. They have always been so, but such pride was always associated with the language's sacred function. And we see this as Jews used other languages. In fact, language that most Zionists spoke coming in the early times of Zionism was Yiddish, and Hebrew was growing as a language. So it was not something that was kept, which again is at odds with the idea of we were always dreaming of the homeland and we were always hoping to go back. Well, then why weren't you speaking Hebrew the whole time? The classic Jewish character had practically disappeared from Jewish literature during the long centuries that followed the collapse of the ancient Jewish statelet in Palestine, until the birth of the Zionist movement. That hero was subsequently replaced by the Hebrew character, once more, which appeals to the legends of the Old Testament. Only this time, he is without a god, a predestined fate, or spiritual objectives. In a ludicrously quixotic manner, the Jewish literary character now represents absolute power and purity. And part of that is portraying Jewish racial superiority. Disraeli, this is Benjamin Disraeli, British Prime Minister, said a lot more than he should have in The Wondrous Tale of Alroy. Revealing the truth of the racist ambitions of the extremist Jews provoked a wide-ranging reaction. One critic commented on the novel by pointing out that Disraeli was effectively saying that Jews are ordained on historical and religious grounds to assume the moral and intellectual leadership of the universe. So, this is what one critic got from that novel. A character named David in the novel Exodus affirms, "I think that no one in the world is brave anymore, except our own people." There's only one brave people, and we'll hear echoes of this in the most moral army in the world. We even have to have the Goyim, the non-Jews, affirm this racial superiority. The English officer Malcolm, in the same novel Exodus, says, "I like Jewish soldiers. The Hebrew warrior is the finest, for he fights and lives close to ideals. This land is real to him. He lives with great glories all around him. Your chaps in the Haganah probably constitute the most highly educated and intellectual, as well as idealistic body of men under arms in the entire world." David of Exodus would declare, "There never existed a people anywhere who fight for the sake of freedom in the way that ours did." They always have to be the best. No one can be better. And again, having the Goyim carry the water here, this is an American journalist exploding in the face of a Palestinian who insisted that the land was his. There was never a house here. There was a desert and a stinking swamp and pox-ridden fellahin. Your population was on the decrease for centuries because half your babies were dying from filth in their cradles, and since the Jews came it doubled. They haven't robbed you of an inch of your land, but they have robbed you of your malaria and your trachoma and your septic childbeds and your poverty. So it isn't enough for the Zionists to demonize the Palestinians. They have to have other characters demonize them within these stories. That's not enough either. You have to have the Palestinians hate themselves. So we have situations like this again in Exodus. We find an Arab with whom the author is very sympathetic because he, of course, believes that, quote, the Jews are the only salvation for the Arab people. The Jews are the only ones in 1,000 years who have brought light to this part of the world. When the Arab character is allowed to offer his perspective on the ongoing struggle, he would typically say, the devil may take them, the Jewish settlers, away, but he could leave their tractors. They're dogs and SOBs, but they know how to work. They will grow tomatoes and melons and God knows what out of that stony hill. We are too lazy. Ya Abu, by God. So all of the literature has to affirm what we hear in the school books. Remember Nurit Peled-Elhanan's description in Israeli school books. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. Everything about the story, the narrative, has to be affirmed. It's affirmed in the fictional literature. It's affirmed in his historical books. It's affirmed in media. It's affirmed everywhere that the Arabs are lazy, Jews are superior. Everybody knows that. And this obviously results in general contempt for Arabs. Again, quoting from Exodus, if the Arabs of Palestine loved their land, they could not have been forced from it, much less run from it without real cause. The Arabs had little to live for, much less to fight for. This is not the reaction of a man who loves his land. So, it's clear to me from reading all the accounts that it was a clear vision of Zionism that the Israelis had to die rather than give up the land. But I want to point out, if we had removed weapons training and weapons from the kibbutzim in 1948, and they had been set on by armed Palestinians and armed Arab armies, they would not have stood. They would have run like every other human in history. They would not have just stayed there to be slaughtered. The Palestinians reacted like anyone else would who were unarmed and being attacked by armed people. They fled. So this conclusion that you didn't love your land because you didn't stay to get slaughtered, it's easy for them to say that because they were never in that position. They weren't staying to get slaughtered. They were supplied by weapons and they fought. And they weren't allowed to surrender, even in the few times in which I think 3 or so instances during the campaign in the South in 1948 where kibbutzim were under attack, and I think one time in the North as well, they were told not to surrender. So it's clear that that's a value from the Zionist side, but that doesn't mean that someone who flees when they're under attack and they have no weapons, that they don't love their land. This is a false premise. The lives of Arab children seem to be useless as opposed to the morale of Jewish children. There did not seem to be any kind of fun, songs, games, or goals among Arab children. It was an inert existence. A new generation is born along a desert caravan that travels along an unending desert. Arabs cannot aim well with their weapons. They abandon their dead, leaving it to the Jews to bury them. It is indeed true that they know how to operate tanks. They do so in their jalabiya. While Jews are able to buy the loyalty of any Turk with ease, they know that the only thing that Arabs can understand is a fist. So these are the sorts of things that are repeated over and over. We have photographs that belie all of this. We see happy children, we see happy Palestinian children playing games, learning, advancing themselves, but this is what has to be believed. They have to be believed to be animals, and that's why you can kill animals, because they aren't humans. The other thing is the transposition of violence against Jews in other parts of the world as to be repaid against the Palestinians. In another novel, we encounter a greater horror. The Jewish character Pat, for example, who is distressed by the death of his lover Sarah, destroys 2 Arab tanks and sets them on fire. He was tired, but he felt that his body was light in an unbelievable way. He turned toward the two tanks and said, "This is for you, Sarah, for you." Sarah died in a forced labor camp in Hitler's Germany. For his part, the distressed lover recounts his tragedy 10 years later and 10,000 miles away from the camp in which he died, while attacking Arabs, not Germans. The author finds this to be entirely logical. And that's why you hear the rhetoric that the Palestinians are Nazis. So, reading all this literature, tying together the common themes, Kanafani gives a really compelling outline of what you're going to see in a lot of this Zionist literature, which is often very poorly written. The common cause among Zionist writers give rise to a shared literary trajectory, based on which an almost identical sequence of events unfolds in almost all of the novels that have been written on the establishment of Israel. The sequence of events is as follows. 1. The hero comes from Europe, in most cases, as a result of apocalyptic persecution. He is fleeing the memories of one or two recent massacres at the hands of Hitler, the effects of which remain in his mind and body. He loses his family and friends along the way, and searches for a quiet place to recover, where dormant national aspirations emerge from the depths of his unconscious to rehabilitate his pride. 2. The hero falls in love with a non-Jewish person, but this person could never be an Arab for reasons that will soon be apparent. Through this relationship, the author provides a full explanation of the Zionist perspective and aspirations, and moderates a dialogue through which the story always puts the narrative of Jewish torment at the forefront, thereby entirely obscuring the heart of the matter. This results in the non-Jewish character's discovery of personal responsibility for the catastrophe, conversion to Zionism as a redemptive measure for a sin committed elsewhere, and ultimately becoming a proponent of the Zionist cause. 3. The Arabs, being the direct adversary, are represented as individuals without a cause, often as mercenaries who either serve a foreign, or at best, feudal power. This is how the author affirms the Arabs' mental and civilizational backwardness as an incurable disease. If there happens to be an Arab character that the hero likes and respects, it would be one who believes that Judaism is the only solution for the Arabs. Through the events of the novel, the author focuses on the barbarism of the Arabs and on their sheer lack of connection to the land, which they are said to have ruined over generations. This is often accompanied by the author's attempt at exaggerating the Jewish connection to Palestine. To that end, the Jewish hero is revealed to be an astute scholar of archaeological matters and the myths of the Old Testament. 4. With the above tools, the author commences the events of the novel, but he remains in need of a justification for not integrating into the society from which he came. Thus, an abrupt emphasis on the world's oppression against the Jews constantly repeats itself. The object here is not only to present this oppression and exaggerate it, thanks to the world's incapacity to understand the Jews, it is also to show Jewish solidarity in the face of that oppression. Other peoples are attacked from this premise through contempt and trivialization, much like how Leon Uris's Exodus portrayed Jewish resistance in Poland by scorning the Poles across many pages. 5. In light of the absence of geographical, linguistic, historic, and economic ties among the Jews, the Zionist author cannot help but regard religion and race as a single internal factor, alongside other external factors, that is, oppression or Hitler's massacres, that push the Jews toward Palestine. Thus, Zionist literary works engage in racist diatribes in various ways, through which the hero attains an absolute sense of competence and becomes mentally, physically, and historically infallible. This character not only meets every challenge, but overcomes it with ease. In other words, the character turns into a caricature that has nothing to do with human experience, nor with the achievement of artistic merit. These 5 points represent the broad parameters of the Zionist novel. Only the literary works of Jews who lived in Palestine before 1948 are not beholden to them for various reasons, chiefly that such writers witnessed the reality as it was, and because they did not orient their writings towards foreign audiences. Exodus encapsulates the above outline, along with countless other works. In short, the Zionist writer is concerned with the following themes. 1. Absolute Jewish superiority and the infallible hero. 2. The position vis-a-vis the Arabs, in particular, and other people more generally. 3. The character of the Jewish people and how they relate to Israel. 4. Zionist justifications of conquering Palestine, which include emphasizing anti-Jewish oppression in general and Hitler's massacres in particular. There's a lot more, and it's actually given me a lot of different books I need to read. I'm going to have to read Leon Uris's Exodus so I can get a better understanding of what Kanafani has outlined here in broad strokes. But if you liked what you heard here, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with other people who are interested in understanding Zionism in its totality, not just from its historical aspect, but from the literary aspect as well, and connecting the dots. You can also support my work by using Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal to send a contribution. The links are in the description. You can go down to my Amazon wish list and buy a book off of there and send it my way. I'll review it, and you can be the sponsor for that video. You can also support the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is the main thing that we support on this channel. Proceeds from all these different ways that we receive contributions, a majority of that goes towards the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. And they help children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. They're a great organization. Consider supporting them directly or supporting them indirectly through supporting this channel. Until next time, as always, enjoy your reading.